What is your most optimistic mindset for these times?
My most optimistic mindset is something to do with having a perspective around a bigger picture and something which is also non-human centric. There's also something for me about acting small scale and local and domestic. My sense is that if I take a long view of human history, then there has always been large scale change. And so I find it very helpful to, for example, go back to times when humans were, in my view, more in touch with their environment, living more sympathetically in and within and with their surroundings. So I take some succor from that in knowing that that is what human nature is. Human nature for me is not to be moving so quickly and having all these kind of technological sort of accoutrements attached to our bodies, whatever, every single day. I get a sense of hope that this is just one phase of kind of human evolution. There have been other phases, and there will be more, which will come through this rampant kind of capitalist sort of stuff. It won't last. All civilizations fall. Now, that may sound quite pessimistic, but actually, I flip it on its head and I take kind of optimism from that. This will pass, and then something else will emerge from this. So, standing back and taking that larger view is really helpful for me. And then also, I try to take a non-human centric view of things. What I mean by that is I give as much attention to non-human life forms as I do to human life forms because they're just as valid. So, for example, when people say, "Oh, we need to save the planet," it's kind of like, well, no, the planet will be fine. The planet will adapt. And what we're really talking about is, oh, let's save the human species. I look at the human species, and in many ways, I don't hold out a lot of hope for us kind of extricating ourselves from the current challenges in enough time. But again, that's not a kind of pessimistic kind of point of view. I think something will emerge, from the kind of descent, if you like. And also, I'm really encouraged just to orientate myself towards other life forms. So I share a world we are but one species of millions and millions and millions and millions of species. So I really like to take that view. That's really helpful. So in a practical way, this kind of links in with my third bit about, I say optimistic by being domestic and small scale. I can't control as an individual what goes on in the kind of geopolitical sphere, but I can control to a degree or have more of an impact, maybe to state it more accurately, in terms of what goes on in my garden and the insects and the bees and the birds that I attract. I can impact and influence, for example, the biodiversity of a little patch of green space. And that breeds kind of hope and optimism because there's agency. I've noticed myself in recent times, particularly with the COVID pandemic, I've turned away from a lot of mainstream media. I've become much more discerning about what I take on or what I open myself up to in terms of media coming towards me, and trying to pay much more attention to what's immediate and alive right in front of me. So what I know from my experience is that if I go large scale, geopolitical, distanced, immerse myself in social media, I know that that makes me very pessimistic. So it's almost like, well, if I kind of choose the opposite of those things or something different from those things, then actually more, I suppose I'm using the word hope a lot, then hope and optimism can arise much more from, from taking a larger perspective, not being solely human centric, appreciating that I kind of share this living space with countless other creatures who have just as much right to be here, I believe, and being small scale and domestic and kind of like, what can I do in my own sphere? And when I ask myself that question, there's always a lot I feel I can do.
What have you done to realise your life vision?
Good question. Very apt one, because I think about 18 months ago or so, I wrote Neil's Big Vision, and this was part of the sort of personal work I was doing around finishing my life coaching course, and stepping into being a life coach and being self-employed and changing my life around. So I wrote a big vision at that time. It was really a vision of how I wanted my days to look. Well, didn't have any kind of grand, big, hairy, audacious goals. It was more like, how do I want my days to look and feel? So there was a lot about, one moment I would be coaching and I'd be loving my coaching. People would be kind of coming back to me and I'd be earning a kind of decent living out of it. Then I'd go outside, spend some time in the garden. Then I might go for a walk with my partner. So quite a lot of sort of small scale things that had a kind of interconnected flow to them. So my big vision was, it wasn't about world domination. It was about a life that has some ease and joy and settledness and rootedness in it. So that's the vision. So I do have a vision. Well, I think even prior to that big vision, moving to Croom from Bristol, so a change in locale, moving from the city to the countryside was part of that vision. I think another thing I've done is created space to allow new things to come in. When I first came to Croom, I got a job working at the local gig venue, which is kind of like a social hub for the town as well. I did that for about 3 years, and that was okay. But then I gave that up to go full time with the coaching. So I think there's a lot for me about creating space to allow new things to come in. Up until very recently, I was working 1 day a week in a school. And I gave that up a couple of weeks ago again to create more space. Just in the last few days, I've noticed there's this part in me which wants to say yes, compared to, so I did some work on this last night with a friend and colleague, and identified two parts of me, a very well-known part, which is all about safety and security and wants to hunker down and hide sometimes when it all gets too much. But there's this other part of me who I named Possibility Pete, who wants to kind of go out and say yes to things. Actually doing this is a kind of saying yes to things. And so I'm really trying to consciously let that part have its say, have its voice. So one way in which that is manifested is being here with you today. Mm-hmm. Another thing I'm going to be doing is tomorrow I'm going to be joining an online local business networking forum for a taster session, which is something I'd never thought I would do, but I thought kind of hey ho. So this part of me is like wanting to just explore. And the other thing I think, in terms of realizing my vision is to keep it live, in terms of keep referencing it, keep talking with people about it, with my partner. And I shared my big vision with close friends. I'm a great believer in the fact that something only really becomes real when it's sort of shared between people, because otherwise something isn't really real unless it just stays within me, within my own head. So there's something really important about sharing my vision. And then there's something really important about recognizing, this is classic sort of visioning work. You create a vision, and then you realize, I'm already doing that. So there will be elements of the vision which I'm already doing. And so being conscious of those things. So like I've already created space, I'm already continuing to kind of create a lovely garden. And the interesting thing for me about the process of visioning is that for me, that it's a vision for me. The vision I created for myself was, there was a mixture of stuff which I was kind of already doing in some ways, but then there was also the aspirational stuff. And I didn't consciously write it like this, but that's what became apparent. There's this kind of notion in behavioral psychology, give yourself some wins. In the vision I wrote, I'm already doing that, so tick, tick, tick. And it wasn't as conscious and sort of like deliberate as that, but I was aware of that. So there's things I was already doing, and then there's other things which are kind of more aspirational, not out of reach, and not hard definitive goals by which I can fail against, but an aspiration which is more of a dream and a vision. Those things are as much directions of travel as they are destinations. That's really important for me.